Hey, what's up, guys? Today we're going to be doing a slightly different video. Instead of analyzing one of the games I played, I'm going to just be talking about one of the openings that I really like to play. It's the Evans Gambit. So to get to the position where the Evans Gambit is played, white goes e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4. White opts for the Italian game, and black plays bishop to c5. This is the Joko piano, pretty common. Black is hoping for a quiet game where it'll be a lot of slow and theoretical gameplay. But white here can play b4, and this is the Evans Gambit. And in this position, black usually will play three moves. He'll either capture with the bishop, capture with the knight, or play bishop to b6. Usually black won't bring the bishop back to any of these squares because he could have just brought it to one of those squares if he wanted it there in the first place. So let's look at bishop to b6 first. After bishop to b6, white can just castle, and he's in a pretty good position. The position is pretty equal. However, white enjoys that his king is in safety, and black is slightly slow on development because he had to play bishop to b6, and he lost a tempo. If knight captures on b4, we have c3, and after knight goes back to c6, white can just castle, and again, he's in a better position. He's getting ready to push d4, and although he gave up the b pawn after pushing d4, white will have good compensation because his center will, after, for example, knight to f6 and d4, he's forced to capture, and after captures and bishop to b6, white enjoys a solid center where the knight's coming to c3, the bishop's getting into the game, and it's good compensation for the pawn. After knight captures on b4, be sure to not capture this pawn on e5 with your own knight, because after, something like queen to f6, this attacks the knight and threatens checkmate, or even something like queen to g5, this threatens the knight and also threatens to pick up the g2 pawn. There's not much that white can do, and it's going to be a lost position for white. So remember, go c3, don't play knight captures on e5. And this is the most common and the most interesting. Black plays bishop captures on b4. And after bishop captures on b4, we have c3. And this pushes the bishop back. The bishop will either retreat to a5 to stay along this diagonal. It'll go back to c5, or it'll go back to e7. Going to d6 doesn't really make sense because you stifle the development of your light squared bishop this way. And going to the f8 is just extremely counterintuitive. Let's talk about what happens if bishop to e7. If bishop to e7, white plays d4, and two things usually happen. Black can either capture the pawn or play d6. Let's talk about what happens when black captures the pawn first. If e captures on d4, we have c captures on d4, and in this position, black must move. In this position, white enjoys a strong center, and it's good compensation for the lost pawn. Ideas of bishop to a3 eventually to stop, obviously after the dark squared bishop moves, but after bishop to a3, this will prevent the king from castling. Knight to g5 to target f7, and queen to b3 also to target f7. These are all good ideas. So this is a good position for white. If black goes d6, well, this is even better because queen to b3 is coming immediately. And if black plays something like, well, this attacks the f7 pawn. If black plays knight to h6, you get bishop captures on h6, g captures on h6, bishop captures on f7, and if king to d7, then queen to e6 is checkmate. So black would have to play king to f8 and bishop to h5. This is too strong. The queen's coming to f7 to threaten checkmate, and there's no real good way to defend it. You can't defend with the bishop. You can't defend with the queen. There's no square for the knight to hop to, so the position is most likely lost for black. instead of playing this knight to h6 to defend the f7 pawn, knight to a5 is also possible. But after knight to a5, bishop captures on f7. Again, if king to d7, we have knight captures on e5 check, and black is forced to capture, and then after queen to e6, this is again checkmate. So king would have to move to f8, and if king to f8, then queen to a4 is coming. This move is brilliant because after, for example, if black wants to capture the f7 bishop, then you lose the knight on a5. As black, the material is equal, except white has a much more active position. His pieces are more developed. He's getting ready to castle. Black's king is on f7, and the game is probably lost for black. At least white is in a much better position. So let's go back to when he plays, instead of playing bishop to e7, other possibilities are bishop to a5. And if bishop to a5, this keeps the bishop on the king's diagonal, you still go d4. And after captures, well, if d4 and d6, the same idea applies with queen to b3. So in this position, black would probably capture the d4 pawn, because now this pawn can't capture back because it's pinned by the bishop. Black thinks that he did well, but in reality, after castles and d captures on c3, queen to b3 is coming again, and to attack this pawn, there's only two good ways of defending it: queen to e7 and queen to f6. If queen to f6, we have e5, and if knight captures on e5, we have rook to e1, and this pins the knight to the king. d6 would probably be played here, and if d6 is played, then queen to a4, this wins the bishop. If now you play, for example, I don't know, queen to e7 to still keep an eye on the knight, that's the only way you can protect the piece that you just won. Then knight captures. Yeah, if queen to f6, this is bad. But another move is queen to e7, and this also prevents the bishop from capturing on f7. And a queen to e7, we have knight captures on c3, and after another developing move like knight to f6, we have knight to d5. And if knight to d5 is a very, very strong move, there's only two moves that are really logical here. It's knight captures, and if knight captures, we have e captures on d5. This forces this knight to move. It can go to knight to e5 or knight to b4. For example, if it goes to knight b4, then rook to e1 immediately wins the queen and the game, because now the bishop is no longer attacking e1. More logical is probably knight to e5. But after knight to e5 and knight captures on e5, queen captures on e5, and bishop to b2, this threatens the queen, this threatens the pawn, and it puts the game is very good for white. His pieces are completely developed, and he's castled. And although he's down some material, after d6, and this opens up an attack, white will enjoy the position. So, instead of after knight to c3, if queen to e7 and knight to if queen to e7 and knight captures and knight to f6 again, another move that black can play after knight to d5 is queen captures on e4. And queen captures on e4 is not good. White here goes bishop to g5 to threaten the knight again. And in this position, if black tries to castle to safety, then we have bishop captures, pawn captures, and knight captures on f6. This forks the king and the queen. So if he doesn't castle, on the other hand, and instead plays something else, then the rooks are coming into the game. For example, maybe he plays b6 and tries to fianchetto the light squared bishop. This is coming, and you can exchange. Oops. You can exchange, and after the queen captures, the knight captures. White is up material. Clearly his position is much better, and the game is probably lost. So, yeah. Very, very solid position. Instead, if we go all the way back, and after d4 and castles, and after captures and castles, if black doesn't decide to grab this pawn, which usually doesn't happen, and he just develops a piece, knight to f6, for example, we capture back, and then eventually we're threatening bishop to a3 to prevent him from castling. We're threatening queen to b3 to threaten this pawn. This knight is coming to g5 to go for the pawn. It'll be an unpleasant position for black. So if we continue, that's what happens if black plays bishop to a5. The last thing that could happen is if he plays bishop back to c5, and after bishop to c5, we still go d4. Now this capture is forced, and after captures, we're just in a good position because now he's going to lose the same tempo as if he played bishop to b6. It's good compensation for the pawn. We can castle to safety. The knight's coming into the game. My arrows aren't working. Bishop to b2 is coming on the strong diagonal, and black is still a few moves away from castling. So yeah, this is overall a really solid opening. I really enjoy it. I recommend you guys try it out in some of your games and let me know how it goes. And let me know if you guys want me to talk about like any other openings in depth to try to better your chess game. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.